The rain slid down the narrow windows of the old stone manor as Amelia folded the last of the freshly ironed shirts. She had worked in the Whitmore estate since she was 16, moving silently through corridors lined with portraits of people who would never know her name. The great house was elegant and cold, like most of its residents. The Duke of Whitmore, Edward Cavendish, was known among the staff for his distant manners and measured words. He rarely raised his voice, never rushed, and seemed to observe everything without truly belonging anywhere. To Amelia, he was part of the scenery, an untouchable figure who moved between the library, the study, and the town meetings. That year, all of London talked about only one event: the Whitmore Charity Ball. The ball gathered politicians, business leaders, socialites, and aristocrats who filled the local newspapers with their photos and carefully chosen phrases. For the town, it was an almost mythical night. For the staff, it meant double work, long hours, and little sleep. Amelia helped polish the silver, check the crystal glasses, and arrange the flowers that arrived from an exclusive florist in Mayfair. She listened to the other maids talk about the guests' gowns, the designer labels, and the rumors of who would dance with whom. She smiled quietly, as if those conversations were about stories from another planet. On one of those rainy afternoons, while Amelia adjusted the candles in the main hall, she heard measured footsteps behind her. She straightened her back and turned slowly. The Duke stood at the doorway, still in his riding clothes, with a few specks of mud on his boots. "Amelia," he said in a calm, slightly hoarse voice. "Your Grace," she replied, lowering her gaze. He watched her for a moment that seemed longer than it really was. There was something weighing on his expression, a tension that did not belong to his usual, almost sculpted composure. "Come to my study when you finish here," he said. "I need to discuss something with you." Her heart tightened. She went through, in seconds, every task of the week, every possible mistake. She nodded, pretending tranquility she did not feel, and spent the next minutes placing the last candles as if they were pieces of a fragile game. Later, at the door of the study, Amelia knocked lightly. "Enter," came the answer. The room smelled of old paper, leather, and a subtle note of whiskey. The Duke was standing by the window, looking out at the wet gardens. He turned, his hands behind his back. "The ball is in 2 weeks," he began. "You know that, of course." "Yes, Your Grace." He hesitated, searching for words he clearly had not rehearsed. "The event has an additional condition this year," he continued. "Every guest must be accompanied by someone of their own choice, a partner." Amelia blinked, not understanding why this concerned her. He took a breath, as if stepping over an invisible line. "I have decided that I will not invite anyone from my usual circle," he said. "No debutantes, no society daughters, no political alliances." Amelia remained silent. "I want you to come with me," he said. For a second the word impossible echoed in her mind. She looked at him, certain she had misheard, but his expression was serious, steady, without irony. "Your Grace, that is not appropriate," she murmured. "I am a maid." "You are Amelia," he corrected gently, "and that is precisely why I am asking you." He walked to the desk and picked up a folded paper. "The organizing committee has set a minimum donation for each guest," he explained. "I have committed £10,000 in your name. It will be registered as your contribution." Amelia's breath caught. £10,000 was not just a number. It was more than her entire income for many, many years of work. "I am not asking this as a favor," he said, watching her reaction. "I am offering an opportunity for you to be seen. For one night, no one will be able to pretend you do not exist." Amelia felt a mix of fear, disbelief, and a faint, guarded flame of something dangerously close to hope. "Why me?" she finally whispered. "Because you have been invisible for too long," the Duke answered, "and I am tired of rooms full of people who only look at their own reflections." She thought of the laughter that would echo in the corridors when the other staff found out. She imagined the scandal among the guests, the gossip in the town, but she also imagined something she had never allowed herself to picture, entering a ballroom not as someone who served, but as someone who had the right to be there. "If you accept," he added calmly, "everything you need will be provided. Dress, shoes, transportation. You will have complete freedom to say no." Amelia looked at her hands, marked by years of work. Then she looked at him, at the seriousness in his eyes, and realized that perhaps this invitation said more about him than about her. She swallowed hard. "Very well, Your Grace," she said, with her voice trembling slightly. "I accept." For the first time, she thought she saw a shadow of relief in his expression. "Then we have much to do," he replied. And in that instant, without either of them fully understanding, something in the old house shifted, as if the portraits on the walls had just witnessed the beginning of a story no one would have dared to predict. Chapter 2. The transformation begins. The next morning, a car with tinted windows stopped in front of the small row of shops in town. Amelia, in a simple coat and her only pair of decent shoes, stepped out with her heart in her throat. She had never entered most of those places, only passed by, looking at the displays. The Duke's secretary had given her a list: a boutique, a shoe shop, a discreet jewelry store, and a small refined beauty salon. Each name sounded like the kind of establishment that never expected someone like her to cross the threshold. In the boutique, the air smelled of perfume and expensive fabric. Packs of dresses in carefully chosen colors seemed to float. A tall woman with precise movements approached with a professional smile. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," Amelia answered, almost in a whisper. "In the name of Whitmore." The effect was immediate. The woman straightened her posture, the smile became more formal, and she guided Amelia to a private fitting room at the back, where the noise from the street could no longer be heard. The curtain closed, creating a small world where time seemed to slow down. They brought dresses in silk, satin, and chiffon, soft fabrics that slid over her skin in unfamiliar ways. At first, Amelia avoided looking directly in the mirror. She was afraid of not recognizing herself, or worse, of seeing the same maid silhouette attempting to dress up as someone she was not. But with each dress, something changed. The consultant asked few questions and observed a lot. The way Amelia adjusted the straps, how she walked, the way she froze when the neckline revealed too much of the collarbone. "You are not used to this, are you?" the woman asked without judgment. "No," Amelia admitted. "I work in a house. I am part of the staff." The consultant only nodded, as if that detail explained a series of silent gestures. Then she chose a dress in a deep, understated color. It was not the brightest in the room, nor the most daring. It was balanced. Classic lines, a shape that followed the body without shouting for attention. "Try this one," she suggested. When Amelia looked in the mirror, she did not see a fairy tale princess. She saw a version of herself that had always been there, hidden under uniforms and rushed mornings. The dress respected her posture, her discretion, and turned them into elegance. "It suits you," the consultant said softly. "You do not need more than this." The Duke had left payment authorization for everything. For the first time in her life, Amelia chose, without checking the price tag, guided only by how she felt. That in itself felt like a revolution. In the shoe shop, a quieter place with soft lighting, she found a pair of heels that were beautiful but stable enough to allow her to walk without fear of falling. In the jewelry store, the pieces were not extravagant, but discreet. A pair of earrings and a delicate necklace that seemed to illuminate her face without overwhelming it. At the salon, the hairdresser studied her hair with a professional curiosity. "You always wear it tied back, yes?" "Yes." "Then we will leave it loose, but under control," he decided. They did not transform her into someone else. They polished what was already there. A subtle makeup, hair with soft waves, a skin tone evened out. When she looked at the final result, Amelia felt startled, not because she did not recognize herself, but because she recognized a version of herself she had never had permission to reveal. On the way back to the manor, the road cut through green fields darkened by the winter sky. In the car's reflection, she saw a woman who could enter a ballroom without apologizing with her posture. When she arrived, some of the staff peeked from the windows. Whispers spread quickly in the kitchen and corridors. The young maid, who was always in the background, had gone out for a fitting, invited by the Duke himself. At dinner time, Amelia served as usual, in her uniform, shoes well polished. It was as if the other version of her, the one from the boutique and the salon, existed in a parallel universe. But when the Duke crossed the dining room and his gaze found hers, there was a brief pause that only the two of them perceived. Everything was ready. The house, the dress, the scandal waiting at the door. What no one knew yet was how deeply one single night could change the way a woman saw herself, and how a man, used to controlling everything around him, would lose control of the only thing that had always protected him, the distance between his world and everyone else's. Chapter 3. The Night of the Ball. The night of the ball arrived wrapped in a cold, dry wind that swept through the gardens and made the lanterns flicker. Inside the manor, everything shone. The chandeliers glowed, the polished floors reflected the lights, and an orchestra tuned instruments in the gallery, filling the air with the promise of music. The guests began to arrive in a procession of cars and drivers, coats and sequins. The main hall filled with laughter, compliments, and subtle assessments. Women in elaborate dresses greeted one another with practiced enthusiasm. Men adjusted their cufflinks, exchanged firm handshakes, and measured each phrase as if it might end up printed in the morning paper. Amelia, in her room in the staff wing, stared at the dress hanging in front of her. Her hands shook slightly as she carefully stepped into it, feeling the fabric settle over her body as if it had been made for that exact moment. She fixed the earrings, closed the necklace, and took a deep breath before slipping on the heels. The corridor to the main part of the house seemed longer than usual. Each step was a negotiation with her nerves. Behind the doors, she heard echoes of music and voices. There was no turning back without creating an even greater scene. At the bottom of the staircase, the Duke waited, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. When he saw her, his expression did something that would have gone unnoticed by most of the guests. It softened. He did not seem surprised, but rather as if a part of him had expected exactly that effect. "Amelia," he said, in a lower tone than usual. "You look, He stopped, searching for a word that would not sound empty. "Like yourself." Finally. She felt the heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Your Grace," she replied, trying to maintain composure. The Master of Ceremonies signaled that the next pair to be announced was ready. The Duke offered his arm. For a fraction of a second, Amelia hesitated. Then she rested her hand lightly on his sleeve. The doors opened. His Grace, the Duke of Whitmore, and Miss Amelia Harper. The words hung in the air like a silence before the storm. Heads turned almost in unison. Conversations stopped halfway through sentences. For a brief instant, the only sound came from the orchestra. Amelia felt dozens of gazes on her skin, like cold raindrops. Some were astonished, others openly disapproving, others merely curious. She heard murmurs, half-whispered questions. "Is that the maid? What is the Duke thinking? This must be some sort of statement." The Duke kept walking with calm dignity, as if nothing was out of place. His presence carved a path through the sea of reactions. By his side, Amelia straightened her back a little more, focusing on each step. When they reached the center of the hall, the host of the charity gave a brief, formal welcome speech, pretending not to perceive the tension in the room. The orchestra began the first waltz. "May I?" the Duke asked. She nodded. They moved to the dance floor. At the first steps, Amelia feared she might make a mistake, step on his shoes, draw laughter. But he guided her with a firm, discreet hand, giving her time to adapt to the rhythm. "You are doing very well," he murmured. "I am terrified," she replied under her breath. "That makes two of us," he answered, almost with a hint of humor. Around them, the other couples joined slowly, as if deciding whether or not to adhere to that unexpected scene. Some chose to watch from the edges, like spectators at a play. Others entered the dance floor with forced naturalness, trying to pretend nothing was unusual. At the tables, comments multiplied. Yet, despite the whispers, something undeniable was evident. Amelia was not a caricature. She did not look like someone clumsily dressed in borrowed luxury. She was poised, serene, and carried the dress as if it were an extension of her own dignity. When the music ended, there was a brief, awkward pause before a round of applause. Part was for the orchestra, part for the courage of that first dance that had set the tone of the night. The Duke led Amelia to a table reserved for them. Waiters approached with wine and small dishes. Some guests came to greet the Duke, now compelled to address the woman at his side. "Miss Harper, is it?" asked a politician with a forced smile. "Yes," she answered, meeting his gaze without lowering her eyes. "And what do you do?" asked his wife, with a tone that pretended to be neutral. "I work at Whitmore," Amelia replied simply. "I know the house better than most of the guests here." The Duke almost allowed himself a discreet smile at that answer. As the hours passed, the initial shock gave way to a mixture of fascination and discomfort. Some women approached Amelia out of genuine curiosity, wanting to know her story. Others kept their distance, afraid that a woman from the staff could be treated as an equal in a space they considered exclusively theirs. At one point, in a quieter corner of the gallery, the Duke turned to her. "Do you regret coming?" he asked. She looked at the hall, at the guests who still stole glances, at the crystal chandeliers and the orchestra. "No," she said firmly. "For the first time, they are forced to see me, even if they do not like what they see." He nodded as if that had been his intention from the beginning. What neither of them fully measured in that moment was how deeply that night would echo beyond the corridors of the manor, in the town, and within themselves. Chapter 4. After the shock. The morning after the ball, the world seemed quieter than it really was. In the kitchen of the manor, however, the air buzzed with repressed excitement. The staff circulated between trays and dishes, exchanging looks that said more than their words dared to. Amelia entered wearing her usual uniform, hair tied back again. For a brief moment, everything stopped. Then the movements resumed, but the gazes lingered on her a little longer than usual. "So," whispered one of the younger maids, while pretending to arrange the cutlery, "was it as beautiful as they say? The flowers, the lights, the music," added the cook with a half-smile. "Tell us something, girl. We only saw from afar." Amelia gave small, carefully chosen answers. She talked about the orchestra, the crowded dance floor, the laughter echoing in the gallery. She did not mention the judgmental looks or the wave of tension that swept through the room at her entrance. That part, somehow, belonged only to her. In town, the reactions came faster. At the cafe near the main square, people read the social column of the newspaper with astonished expressions. The first photos of the charity ball showed the Duke of Whitmore with a woman many had never seen in elegant places. "That cannot be," said the cafe owner, adjusting his glasses. Is she not the maid from the manor? They say he donated £10,000 in her name, whispered a customer. In her name, not his. Speculations multiplied. Some claimed it was a romantic gesture. Others argued that it was a public statement about class and status. There were those who preferred the simpler explanation, a whim from a bored aristocrat. Back at the manor, the Duke faced a different battle. In his mailbox, invitations and letters awaited. Some praised his modern and bold act, turning what he had done into a kind of symbol of progress. Others disguised their discomfort under polite phrases and veiled suggestions that such gestures could damage his reputation and confuse the roles between staff and family. In a meeting room at a nearby club, a group of local businessmen discussed the matter with forced calm. "Whitmore is crossing a line," said one, watching the rain hit the windows. "If people start thinking staff and nobility can mix like that, what comes next?" "Perhaps a society a little less rigid," answered another, more thoughtful. He did not humiliate her. He gave her a place at his side. In the middle of all that noise, Amelia went back to making beds, polishing furniture and serving tea. Yet inside her something had changed. The ball had not turned her into a different person, but had expanded the space she felt allowed to occupy in the world. When she met the Duke again in the library a few days later, the air was full of unspoken questions. "You must have heard some things," he said without preamble. "People love to talk," she replied, with a calmness that surprised even herself. "Some of them think I used you for a show," he continued. "Others think there is something more." She studied his face, searching for cracks in the aristocratic armor. "And what do you think?" she asked. He hesitated longer than usual. "I think," he said slowly, "that for the first time in a long while, I did something that was not calculated for their expectations. I invited the only person in this house who looks at everyone without pretending." Amelia remembered the dance floor, the dizzying feeling of being both observed and free. She also remembered the way he had offered his arm, not as if doing her a favor, but as if acknowledging an equality that no title could either grant or deny. "Whatever their intentions," she said, "you gave me a night I will carry with me for the rest of my life. They cannot take that away." The Duke looked at her as if seeing not the maid, not the guest of the ball, but the woman who had found a way to stand in two worlds without belonging entirely to either. From then on, small changes began to take place. The other staff treated Amelia with a care that mixed admiration, envy, and protection. In town, some doors that had always remained half-closed now opened with a little more ease when she passed. Yet Amelia knew she would always be that woman who walked between lines, between the ballroom and the kitchen, between the luxury of the dress and the roughness of the uniform, between the Duke's gesture and the world's reaction. And perhaps, she thought, that in-between space was exactly where her true strength lived. Weeks passed, and the story of the ball slowly turned from a scandal into a reference point. When people mentioned that night at Whitmore, everyone knew what they were talking about. The image of the Duke with the maid on his arm became a kind of symbol, depending on who interpreted it, of courage, impropriety, or transformation. Inside the manor, life found a new rhythm. Amelia continued her tasks, but it became impossible to treat her as if nothing had happened. The other maids sent for her opinion on small matters of etiquette they had never cared about before. The housekeeper, more reserved, began to rely on her for decisions that required tact and discretion. One afternoon, the Duke summoned her again to the study. The same room where everything had begun now seemed slightly different to her. The shelves, the curtains, the desk, everything was familiar, but carried the echo of the choice that had changed the course of things. "Amelia," he began, with that calm that hid an undercurrent of tension, "I have a proposal for you." She stood, hands clasped, waiting. The ball made many people uncomfortable, he continued, and yet it also opened some conversations that were long overdue. There are families in the town asking for help organizing charity events, educational programs, and support for the staff of large houses like this one. She listened carefully, not yet understanding where she fit into that scenario. I want you to take on a new role, he said. Less time in the daily tasks of the house. More time representing Whitmore in those meetings, talking to people, organizing initiatives. You know both worlds. That is precisely what these projects need. Amelia felt her chest tighten. Are you asking me to stop being a maid? I'm asking you to stop being only a maid, he corrected. Your perspective has value beyond these walls. The proposal was tempting and terrifying at the same time. She thought of the security of routine, the tasks she knew by heart. She also thought of the night in the ballroom, of the sensation of walking in a space from which she had always been excluded. And what will they say? She asked, almost as a reflex. They already say too much, he replied. The difference is that now they will have to speak to you directly, not only about you. There was a silence in which she weighed more than money, position, or status. She weighed the way she wanted to remember herself in a few years, a woman who had received an unusual invitation and then quietly returned to the shadows, or a woman who had used that crack in the wall to widen it just enough for others to pass through after her. I accept, she said, with a firmness that surprised even her. From then on, Amelia's days changed. She sat at tables where, until recently, she would have been the one serving tea. She participated in meetings where staff wages, working hours, and training opportunities were discussed. She listened, spoke, and learned to navigate a world that still looked at her with a mixture of surprise and resistance. Not everyone accepted her presence easily. Some saw in her rise an affront to the order they had always known. Others, more silently, drew strength from her example. A waiter in another house, a laundress who dreamed of studying, a young receptionist who saw in Amelia proof that transition between worlds was possible, even if it was not simple. The Duke, for his part, maintained his outward reserve. But in small gestures, like the way he turned to her for advice in meetings, or how he introduced her to visitors not by her old role, but by her new responsibilities, he showed that his decision at the ball had not been an isolated act. It was part of a slow, conscious change.